I'm Adrienne Pedersen, today on Upfront. The Supreme Court showdown.
He is going to carry out his constitutional duty, and the Republican Senate will carry out our constitutional duty.
Really disrespectful to our democracy and the people of this country.
The fight over who will replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Both Wisconsin senators weigh in on the debate. Then, coronavirus case surge. Wisconsin, one of the top states in the country for new cases. Why are we doing so poorly right now?
Taking on the issues important to Wisconsin. This is Upfront with your host, Adrienne Pedersen.
Today it is my honor to nominate one of our nation's most brilliant and gifted legal minds to the Supreme Court. She is a woman of unparalleled achievement, towering intellect, sterling credentials, and unyielding loyalty to the Constitution, Judge Amy Coney Barrett.
The president announcing his pick there for the Supreme Court. Welcome to Upfront. 1 week after Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, she became the first woman to lie in state at the U.S. Capitol. Now the fight is on to fill her vacant Supreme Court seat. Republicans are pushing ahead to confirm the president's nominee this year. Democrats are figuring out their options, both sides calling the other hypocritical. We will talk to both Republican Senator Ron Johnson and Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin today, but we will start with Senator Ron Johnson. Senator, we appreciate your time as always, and I want to get right to it. So let's start with the Supreme Court, and I do want to play a clip for you from when you appeared on Upfront in April of 2016. Let's listen to this.
In such a unique moment in time, a couple months, literally 7 months before an election now, let the American people have a voice in terms of the direction of the Supreme Court. They're going to decide the direction of the country. Why not the Supreme Court?
So again, that was April 2016. This time around, I mean, we're not 7 months out. We're 5 weeks out to the election. Why not let the American people decide this time?
Well, good morning, Adrienne. It's a completely different circumstance. Back in 2016, we had a Democrat president and a Senate controlled by Republicans. And so we needed the American people to basically break the tie. And, we also mentioned that at the same time as well. So the fact of the matter is now in 2020, we have a Republican president. We have the Senate controlled by a Republican. And by the way, our majority actually grew in 2018. And so the voters did decide in 2016 and 2018 to allow President Trump to stay in office at least till the end of January 2021 and to have Republicans maintain the majority through the end of this Congress. So that is, by the way, the precedent. That is the norm. So there's nothing hypocritical about the position I took in 2016 or 2020.
And I get what you're saying about the divided government, but considering we're just 5 weeks out now, why not just let the new president, whether that is President Trump or whether it is Joe Biden, decide? Are you afraid that the president will lose the election?
No, he is going to carry out his constitutional duty of nominating a Supreme Court justice to fill a vacancy, and the Republican Senate will carry out our constitutional duty of advice and consent. And based on the list he has provided, based on the people he's talking about there on his short list, these are qualified jurists. These are judges. And that, quite honestly, is what the American people elected President Trump and Republicans in the Senate to do. The party that has broken precedent and norms when it comes to judicial appointments are the Democrats. I mean, there's a verb called borking because of what they did to Robert Bork and then Judge Thomas, and then Brett Kavanaugh. And it was Harry Reid, by the way, that completely broke precedent by changing the rules of the Senate with a mere 51 votes rather than what normally had happened is at the start of the Senate, every session, with a 2/3 vote.
But what if Joe Biden wins in November? Do you still think it's fair then? Because it seems as though voters will have made a different choice.
Again, they made the choice. We have this constitutional duty while we hold this majority in the Senate and while President Trump is in office. And if
so, you're
President
in favor
Biden,
of a lame duck appointment.
If Vice President Biden gets elected, if there's a vacancy that occurs after January, I don't know the exact date of the inauguration, but late in January, then he'll assume that constitutional duty to nominate somebody. And then whoever's in charge of the Senate will fulfill their constitutional duty in terms of advice and consent.
So you're in favor of a possible lame duck appointment then?
Well, right now, as I'm listening to Leader McConnell, the game plan is to hold the hearings and to take the vote even before the election. So there's no issue of a lame duck presidency here.
And what is the timeline for that? How soon do you think that could happen, that Republicans could get a justice confirmed?
Before the election. That's what I'm hearing is the basic timeline.
Is there any concern that maybe you don't have the votes from your fellow Republicans?
It doesn't sound that way. And again, President Trump is very transparent. Before 2016, and he's updated the list since then. He's actually named the people that are on his list for Supreme Court justices. Joe Biden won't do that because he realizes the American people don't want super legislators. They don't want radical leftist super legislators.
And I will be asking Senator Baldwin about that in this upcoming segment, if she thinks that Joe Biden should release a list of justices. But I want to make sure to ask you about this peaceful transition of power. I know you heard that the president would not commit to that if he loses the election, saying, well, we're going to have to see what happens. What's your response to that?
Well, again, what I heard President Trump talk about, and it's a very legitimate concern, is what is going to happen as you have Supreme Court in Pennsylvania, for example, say they'll accept ballots without a postmark. You can count them, for 3 days after the election. Basically totally contrary to Pennsylvania state law. Even here in the state of Wisconsin now, we have a federal district judge saying we're going to keep counting ballots for 6 days after the election. I am highly concerned, as is the president concerned, about what's going to happen. We have a dramatic increase in mail-in ballots. Do we have proper controls to make sure that those ballots are valid and they are counted on time so the American people know who won or lost, hopefully by the end of the late in the day on the election day? If this thing lingers for days and possibly weeks and ballots are in dispute, that could be a real mess.
And I just want to be 100% clear on what you're saying, because, it is a hallmark of American democracy to have this peaceful transition of power. So are you saying you would be in favor of the president fighting that?
No. There will be a peaceful transition of power when the results are known. But what I'm saying is I am highly concerned that those results will not be known on election night because of this massive increase in mail-in balloting. And then as the results, it takes days or potentially weeks to actually find out who the winner is. Judicial activists coming in and basically making rulings contrary to state law could open up a real can of worms and really put the legitimacy of the election at risk. And that is highly concerning to me. So what I would suggest in Wisconsin, for example, is I hope the state legislature returns, definitively says this is what our law is. You have to mail in your ballots by X date. And I would also suggest that we change the law so that election officials can start opening and counting those ballots well before election day so that Wisconsin results are known by 9, 10, 11, 12 o'clock on election day, so we're not part of the problem.
All right, Senator Johnson, thank you.
Have a great day.
The Senators Committee just released this 87-page report on Hunter Biden and Burisma last week, so I asked the senator about that. You can find our continued conversation on the Upfront section of WISN.com. Next.
It was outrageous. I feel like I'm going to use that word several times during this interview.
The Democratic response to the vacant Supreme Court seat.